And we are live. What's going on YouTube and Facebook Live? It's your boy Billy Wroe. Today's Tuesday, and you should probably know what that means by now. It is time for Taralyn, Michelle, and Billy Wroe live. Let's get it. What's going on, sis?
Nothing much. I am looking forward to this, and I am looking forward to. Okay, well, if you hear my phone, I heard something. I was like, "What in the world?" This
So
is
if you
the
hear your phone, you got me coughing already.
Taralyn, Michelle, and Billy Roll, the Hood edition. If you hear my phone back there, I'm sorry.
I literally have not coughed all day, and here you go,
Well,
breaking the cough out.
And see, look, it's because we started off and I was like where I was supposed to be for the first time. What is this, the 11th episode? What is it?
Yeah, number 11, 11, 11.
Okay, so it took 11 for me to be
Mhm.
where I'm supposed to be. And then I got you coughing, but maybe 12. Maybe that's
Right.
the number.
Now we just need to know you have your phone where it's supposed to be so you can silence it. But that's all right. If it goes off, then it must be important today.
Billy, I have to keep you on your toes.
Mhm.
This, I mean, if I came and I was just everything was uneventful, you'd be like, you know what, something's missing. I'd be like, yeah, shenanigans.
Right. The shenanigans, the shenanigans.
Right,
Hey, what's
exactly.
going on, brother Bruce? Looks like we got a couple people in here live, so let's go ahead and get started.
Let's do it.
Today's topic that we have up for live discussion is traumatic suppression.
Mm.
Um, I'll take this one first on what this means to me. This particular topic on traumatic suppression. When I think about what that is, I think about the powder keg that builds up within us as we experience traumatic events, and it's always fascinating to me. Whenever we pick a topic, all of a sudden my social media starts sending me things on the topics that we pick. And it's funny because I don't put it in any place where an algorithm can grab it. It's just some things that I randomly come across. But there was one thing that I came across that also resonated with me with this topic of traumatic suppression. And it was talking about how when we experience trauma, how that trauma plays out in our brain and the chemistry of our brain. In I think the hypocortex, the prefrontal cortex, and one other area in the brain. And it actually creates micro, for lack of better terms, micro tears of brain damage in the brain when we experience trauma. In some areas of our brain, it will enlarge the areas of our brain, so like areas of aggression and things like that. In other areas, it will shrink the areas like the logic center and the prefrontal cortex. It will lose its ability to help make decisions. So when I think about traumatic suppression, I think about all those things and the powder keg that they build up in the areas in our life and relationships, and how we inevitably end up lashing out at others because of the traumas that we have decided to suppress in our lives. What do you think about this particular topic, Taralyn?
You know, it's so funny that you should go straight to the complexities of the brain because it ties directly into what I was thinking. When I think about traumatic suppression, what I think about is different ways in which it shows up in our physical. A lot of the times, the way you're navigating life, sometimes the way in which your health is probably progressing in life, the way in which you deal with stress. You have all of these things that don't seem like they could have anything to do with trauma that you're holding on to. And what happens, I think, is over time, that snowball effect that'll happen physically in different ways will make someone pause and then start to go back and backtrack to see what is it that could be contributing to the stress that I'm having, the lack of sleep that I'm having, the fact that I can't keep weight off, or the fact that I feel the need to chew all the time to feel comfortable. So then all of those things would start in the brain, just like you're talking
Right.
about. Is all of those things would begin in our brain, and then because of the different areas of our brain that could be impacted and affected by these emotions that we're holding on to, those different things can start to show up in us physically. And then, as you mentioned, the way in which we process, rationalize, act, react to things within our life. So we're kind of on the same page with that.
Ooh, I like it. And I'm still waiting for when we're on different pages because that's going to be a fun conversation too.
You know what? When we get into the ones where we start talking about some sex and stuff like that, I'm pretty sure we're going to be on different pages when it comes to that. We typically are when we talk about those types of things. I'll be like, Billy, what?
This is true. I think. Well, I think that's because sexual activities are perceived different from the masculine perspective to the feminine perspective. Sometimes there's overlap, but yeah, they're just seen differently, in my opinion. Not in my opinion, in my experience.
Because I just had the same face, like.
Yeah. So, but we ain't going there today. We'll go there when we come back for the next season. We'll go there. So yeah. So, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that when I think about traumatic suppression, I think that there are first of all, just those two words together would bring to mind one thing. I think that people always think of trauma related, it's got to be something catastrophic and big. I think that that's what we're used to, and we can pinpoint within ourselves something that's catastrophic and big. But what I think that's more common are some of the smaller things that may bother us, but we don't want to think of it as traumatic. In fact, we're socialized to be so unbothered, zero F's given.
Right.
Those are the things that end up compounding over time, and I believe contributing to a lot of different defense mechanisms, walls that we put up, especially within the context of relationships. So what do you think? Do you think that more so with people, it's the little things that we will not allow ourselves to label as trauma that may compound over time, as opposed to the things that would be readily identifiable as trauma, say, for example, the death of a loved one?
I do think, here's what I think. I think there's a level of desensitization to the smaller traumas that we experience. So I think about it as being a child, right? I'm a child, I'm running around, I'm playing out on the playground, I slip, I fall, I scrape my knee up, right? That's trauma, but it's a small trauma. And so I might cry for a little bit, but then I get over it and then I go back to playing. Whereas if I'm that same child running on that same playground and I fall and I break my leg, playtime's over. That trauma is so significant that it forces us to stop. However, in the smaller trauma, if I don't clean and disinfect and keep that area from getting infected, it can become a bigger trauma. I think that overall we have just become desensitized because of all the traumas that we experience. And that's not even just the physical traumas. I think about the things that took place last week with the elementary school shooting in I believe in Houston. Yeah. That is a trauma. And so it's like you experience these little traumas, microaggressions, racism, and all these other things. And you get this callous, you build up this callous to it, in which you become really efficient at ignoring it and at not resolving it until it becomes so much that you can't ignore it. And sometimes you'll find that sometimes traumas will interlink with each other. And that's when you come to a place, because you got 16 different micro traumas that you're holding on to that have banded together and made one major trauma. And you feel like you can't get your feet under you. You feel like nothing's going right. You feel like everything's going left. And it's that desensitization, I think, that is truly the problem when it comes to ignoring the micro or the smaller traumas in our life. And that's why, to me, I think of it as a powder keg, because a powder keg is capable of exploding, number one, because the contents are not pressurized, but there's a lid on the contents. So there's not a lot of space for that keg or an explosion to expand. However, when you think about powder, it's fine granular material. And so you put a bunch of this fine granular material in here that's highly volatile, and you add a spark, and boom, now you have an explosion. And you think about, we've been on this planet for over 40 years, all the microaggressions or all the micro traumas that we ourselves have not taken care of, and how certain things will cause us what we say, oh, well, they did this and it caused me to react.
Mm-hmm.
That's because we have all these traumas that are just sitting there unresolved in their small little powder state, waiting for the right spark to cause a chain reaction and blow up. And so that's what I think about it, as just these small traumas that go unaddressed, and we become, again, very efficient, very intentional, even in some cases. I can say for myself, very intentional that, hey, I'm not going to address that. And so that's where I'm at on it. What about your thoughts?
Yeah, I think when you talk about, being intentional about what you're not going to address, I think too, establishing that place of alignment with that. I mean, there you can be completely out of alignment. You could be too far left, right, up or down with that one, and that's because I think that from a societal standpoint, it's not cool to be a grown person and admit that you have trauma with something,
Right.
unless it's something that fits into a specific box. If you've been a victim of domestic violence, let's say, if you know what I'm saying, they have different categories and boxes that you could put certain trauma in where it's socially acceptable. But to the zero F's given mindset and chucking off things that bother the average person, but it's not cool to actually put that out there. I think that that's an issue too. And because I think that a part of life is us living outside of ourselves, having an external existence before you get some life experience and some wisdom, and you figure out that happiness, alignment, true fulfillment, joy, these things begin internally. They're not
Right.
things that you get externally. You can get some things externally that'll give you that, but it's momentary, it's fleeting. Life in general has ebbs and flows, but if everything that satiates you spiritually comes from the outside, then you really gonna have some ebbing and flowing going on. So I think that the fact that it's not glamorous, it's not something that is socially acceptable. I think it's becoming more acceptable now to really focus on self-care from an emotional spiritual standpoint. I think that that's becoming more acceptable now, but for the longest time, I mean, even if you look at how people portray their lives on social media, there's not too many people who are too quick to post different challenges because of how people look at it, because of how they're received. So I think there's coming to a space of oneness within yourself. And if you have zero F's to give, then let it be about what people outside of you think about you and your journey. And sitting in whatever your truth is. I think that that's a space that, of course, we as mature people know we should be in, but I don't think that there's a lot of people who are comfortable doing that, and that's the reason why those microaggressions or those smaller traumas that you talk about, I think that those things, that's why they can linger on for so long instead of it being something that comes up, you have the foundation in place spiritually to address them, be able to resolve, or even if it's not resolved immediately, because not everything is resolved immediately. Sometimes there are some layers that form when you have an initial trauma, and then you have some layers because it takes some time to process it. Sometimes processing through it is a layered process as well, but at least knowing how to find a space within your being where that has a specific area that it's in while you work on it, and it's not something that compromises the way in which you deal with people, the way in which you process different data and things that you may come in contact with throughout life, just your normal interactions. Have those things, have it where it can be in a space you can still process and move forward in a healthy way. I think getting to a space where that's something that we allow ourselves to do unapologetically is really important.
No, absolutely. Really quick, I want to bring in some things from the chat. I asked a question early in the beginning that says, what do you think traumatic suppression is? How does it manifest in your life? Looks like JC says here, I believe that most of my traumatic experiences as a child were chopped up to tradition. Yeah, that long live the butt whooping. Uh, then I have,
Yeah.
like Key says, sometimes I think we as individuals have a hard time identifying what trauma looks like, especially in those micro traumas. How do you identify these traumas? Because I think they might look different. You want to take that one, or you want me to take that one? That's a great question, Key.
It is. It is. Actually, we can both take a piece of it. I think that identifying what the micro trauma is for you is allowing yourself to be okay with the fact that something feels off. I mean, I can speak for me personally. I've had situations where I wasn't feeling what was going on, but for some reason, I didn't give myself permission to sit in that. I was worried about me feeling some type of way and other people feeling like maybe I shouldn't have, or um, am I warranted in feeling the way? Am I overreacting? Questioning what my experience is, as opposed to, hey, this is where I am. This is how I feel. Forget, first of all, don't second guess it or question it. I don't care what anybody else thinks. This is where I am. This is how I feel. Now exploring, because sometimes you'll feel some type of way and you're not even sure why you feel some type of way. But allowing yourself to sit in the fact that that's your truth and navigate it. So I think that just really trusting your initial emotion on the situation. And just because I have to say this, in trusting that emotion, giving yourself permission doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be reactive. It's just kind of
Right.
like note to self, because when I wasn't allowing myself to sit in that truth, then immediately I went into burying it. Oh, well, no, girl, you tripping in, so then there is no space later where I can address it, because then I'm pretending like I really don't have an issue with it when I know that I do. So to answer your question, just allowing yourself to sit in the truth of how you feel, no judgment from yourself, not caring about what anybody else thinks, and then go from there. I think that that's the best way to identify what's trauma for you.
Oh, yeah. You touched actually quite a few points there for me on that. I think the passive aggressive approach to addressing trauma is what puts us in this position to where we cannot
Yeah.
identify the smaller traumas in our life. Um, and there's two different meditations, and I talk about this in the book, but there's two different meditations that I believe help us with this. First off is the reflection. What took place? What happened? And not just the reflection on what took place and what happened, but what did we anticipate or even desire to happen? That's the first part. And then the second part is mindfulness, which is really about being in the present in a non-judgmental state.
Yeah.
Okay, you reflected, you know what happened, you know what took place, you know what you wanted to happen, and now you get to sit with that and in a non-judgmental state and ask yourself how you feel about it. How do I feel about the moment that of disappointment, whatever it may be? How do I feel about the moment when I am trying to do a Wednesday word and I can't get my words out because I still got COVID brain going on? How do I feel about that? And how do I sit with that?
Mhm.
Because for a person who is sharp and articulate and capable of gathering his thoughts well, it is really nerve-wracking to have this moment in your life where it's like, I can't get the words to come together right. I can't get my mind to get on board with where I want to go, even though I know where I want to go. And so after the fact, after the show is over, after the Wednesday word is completed, it's about sitting with that in a mindful state to be able to absorb what that experience was. Not change what the experience was, not how can I do better next time I have this experience, not overcome the experience, but to sit with that experience and actually absorb what that experience was. Really quick, because I don't want her sitting in the background too long. We got a guest here. It looks like JC. JC, our 2022 graduate alumni. I ain't going to give you a university yet, but welcome. Thank you for joining us live. You're muted right now, by the way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.
Was there, I don't know if you've seen the question that Key proposed. Did you see that question?
I did.
Did you have anything you want to add to that?
It was a very thought-provoking question, and I took a few notes as I listened to both of your responses, and I think you guys are dead on, very accurate with your response. And one thing that came to mind for me was, Billy, when you were talking about reflection, figuring out what the micro and macro traumas may be for me include checking in with myself the minute my triggers are, like, my trigger button is pushed. So for example, if someone says something and my response doesn't necessarily match the situation, right? I'm about to go off, I'm about to blow up, or my ears get red, I get hot, I'm uncomfortable. I'm like, all right, this is a trigger. And why is it a trigger? It's probably a trigger because of something traumatic that happened before that hasn't really been dealt with. And this person's about to get it. And they don't really deserve it because they're unaware of what's happening to me in the background, right? But it's like what is happening to me physically that's causing for me to overreact, or choosing to overreact to something when I reflect and think back, I'm like, oh, I could have dealt with that a little differently. Or I think I overreacted to this situation and, it didn't really warrant that dramatic of a response, to be completely honest. And so identifying those triggers, and a lot of times it comes with reflection. A lot of times you don't realize it's a trigger until after, and you're in reflection mode and you're like, oh, I think I may have an issue with whether it's someone calling someone fat or making a fat joke, or whether it has something to do with skin color. Or for me, I know I have triggers, and a lot of my triggers come from like colorism. I don't know why. But when I hear the whole debate in the like light skin, dark skin, red bone, yellow, like it bothers me. So I really have to sit back and have to ask myself, one, does this person really know what they're doing? Two, are they trying to offend? Three, is this really worth it? And four, does it really make a difference? Like, is what they're saying really affecting my life? And sometimes I have to learn to let go and let God, but I do recognize that those conversations can be very triggering for me.
I love how you said that, because those moments of reflection, my mother always says they can't push a button that doesn't exist.
Right.
And acknowledging the buttons that we have. Excellent point, because I think that oftentimes we have these different experiences, and you get to a certain place of maturity where you can actually acknowledge that, wait a minute, the common denominator in a lot of these things would be me. And what is it that's going on within me? Even labeling it a trigger, getting to the place where you can acknowledge that there is a thing, a label for this that exists. And then now stepping outside of those situations, identifying what your triggers are and how you're going to deal with them when they come up. I actually had to do that. I had to practice.
It's hard because you really have to practice being uncomfortable, right?
Yes.
Sometimes you have to bite your tongue or not speak. And a lot of times for me, that's very hard because I'm extremely outspoken and I'm a right fighter. I'm a right fighter. So because I know this about myself, sometimes I have to really sit back and say, does this person mean it the way it's coming across? Jennifer, they may not mean it that way. So why don't you sit back and ask a few more questions to get more clarification before you have time? You know what I mean? And in doing so, a lot of times I find out that their intentions are not what I assume they were.
Yeah.
Right. Or they just don't know any better. And so sometimes I have to, passionately correct them, politely correct them. But a lot of times I have to remember that these people don't know what my triggers are. They don't know my background. They don't know what I've been through or what I may have experienced. And so how presumptuous of me to assume that they're trying to press a button or trying to get under my skin when they absolutely have no idea who I am and what I've been through. And so it is a lot of reflecting and asking more questions before you're quick to react. And that is something that pause, I had to learn to pause in my 30s, because in my 20s, there was no pause. But as I got older, I had a lot of mentors that were like, boo, you got to pause sometimes, because once I start speaking, I'm passionate and I go a mile a minute. And at the end of the day, when I look back, I'm like, oh, I really don't think they meant it that way. And they come back and they're like, hey, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it that way. But I didn't call you all kinds of names that, you didn't deserve by that point. So as I get older, I get a little bit more patient, and it becomes more about educating people and educating myself. And first knowing what my triggers are. And I'll preface conversations by saying, hey, we're about to go into this conversation that's I'm passionate about this, and I may have a few triggers. So forgive me if I get emotional, or, forgive me if I excuse myself from the conversation or the room for a minute. I'm okay. I'm in a moment. But being honest about what those may be, as opposed to pretending we're okay with everything, we don't have any problems. The next thing you know, people are all kinds of expletives. And they're like, well, what did I say? What did I do? You know what you said, you know what you did. And they're like, no, I really don't. But we assume people can read our minds, or we expect them to.
Do you think, Jennifer, that when it comes to triggers, those buttons that we have that people can push, do you think that it's possible to completely and totally remove buttons, or are we able to just make it so that if it is pressed, it doesn't go as deep as it used to?
That part.
Okay.
Because I think that when we have been through traumatic experiences, Billy was saying that he was, I don't know if you said you were watching or reading something where it shows that the brain waves are altered. Once your brain waves are altered, that's like a permanent indention, right? It's almost like a part of the brain leaves a little indention. And for whatever reason, your brain, when triggered, can go back to that moment, go back to that exact moment in that brain wave, and it duplicates it again, right? So you're going back into that moment. I don't think that you can alter that part of it, the brain chemistry, but I think what you can do is change the way you respond to triggers. Because even to this day, a lot of conversations, my ears will start turning red. I just can't help that. Like that physical attribute, I can't help. And I'm like, my ears are red, aren't they? And people are like, yeah, but I can change what I say and how I react or how I respond, right? And it's almost like giving people your power. When you haven't identified those triggers and learn how to cope with them in a healthy way, you give other people the power over you to be able to press those trigger buttons, right? It's why so many of us are still triggered by the N word. It don't bother me. But I had to get myself to a place where I'm like, well, first of all, why does it bother me? Because the person calling me that is always someone who is, I wouldn't want to trade places with. You know what I mean? And it's like, why are you trying to bring my vibration down so low? It's like a low blow. It's like when you're a kid, you don't have nothing else. You're like, that's why you don't know your daddy. It's like we go for like the lowest blow we can get just to end the whole conversation, right? It's like that drop mic moment that we all look for. And so I really have to like look at people who go for those moments, and I kind of giggle because I'm like, well, I guess you all had a conversation, huh? You don't have any more words to use. Right. And so you go for that one. You know what I mean? And it's like, I'll be that, but I'm still your boss. Or I'll be that, but I'm still blessed and highly favored. I'll be that, but it's not going to trigger me the way it used to. Because before, you were getting hands. Right. Hands University, you were going to get hands. No questions asked on site. And then as I got older, I would like watch those situations unfold where you see what's happening and you're like, no, they're going to do it. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. And you watch them fall for it. And you're like, how many times have I fallen for it? So you really have to check yourself and be like, why does that bother me so much? And why can't I be on the right side? It's just like Will Smith's situation. That triggered a lot of people, including myself, to watch him walk up there and assault someone else, like hands. People were like, oh yeah, I just lay him out. And even though that may have not been the right response, it was like we were all triggered to like pick a side or make a decision. And I aired with Chris Rock because he didn't do anything, but just kind of chose to move on from that moment and address it at a later time. And although we all were like, what are you doing? It was like he had that moment of self-reflection where he was like, okay, have a choice. I can either react this way or I can react this way. And kudos to him because he took the high road, kept making jokes, kept hosting, and just moved on. And it was like people still were like, oh, was that a skit? Because he dealt with it so well and didn't feed into the, oh, you want to fight? Oh, you want to throw hands? Like they could have been up there boxing, like in real life. Right. We have to cut to a commercial break real quick. But he dealt with it in such a way where people were still, even when they went to commercial break, they were like, oh, was that a skit? And I was looking at some people and I was like, nah, that wasn't no skit. The way Will Smith was hollering back at him, I recognized that he had been triggered and he had chose to deal with it the way he chose to deal with it. As opposed to saying, hey, if somebody makes a comment about my wife being bald, which I'm sure they have done because she had been bald for a few months leading up to the Oscars, it was like, all right, I know this is going to be a trigger point. I love my wife. If someone has jokes, how am I going to deal with that? And I think that if he had taken just a little bit more time to reflect on how he could address someone who may make a joke about it, even when he asked him not to, he could have dealt with it a little differently. But we all have choices. And he had a choice. He was laughing. And then it was like, it wasn't funny anymore. And it was like, he had up until he walked up to him to change his mind and turn around and go back. Right. And he had time today. And so it was like, we all have to live in our truths and our moments. And then he had to acknowledge, that's, it's a trigger for me. Don't talk about my family. Don't talk about my wife. Keep my wife's name out your mouth. That's a trigger for him. Right. Don't speak on my family. And we all have been like that. Right. I used to fight for my sister. I had a sister and she had a mouth piece. Bless her heart. But she didn't have any hands. I was blessed with the hands. She was blessed with the mouth. And I constantly found myself fighting battles for her physically. And then at some point I was like, well, how is she ever going to learn to stop talking if she, if she doesn't fight her own battles? And so at some points I had to just sit back and be like, I guess she had to take one for the team.
You should have ducked.
It's terrible. But we all have
really, really quickly, I want to bring in some comments that came in from the chat while you guys were talking. Our ladies were talking. Key said, I found some things I experienced indirectly. Hold on, let me read this again. I found some things I've experienced indirectly. I have some traumas. Example, sometimes when I see airplanes flying, I imagine or see the plane explode and have to pray against it. Trauma from 9/11, ? Brother B. Gates says, the response to the triggers. I'm working on identifying the triggers and controlling my responses. Deep stuff, JC. And then Key comes in and says as well, this is a 2-part, but what are your thoughts on generational traumas handed down through traditions and genetically, etc., that we have not experienced directly or have witnessed through a loved one's testament? Ooh, I'm gonna lead off on that one because in my family there are tons of addicts. And I just say addicts overall because it's in general, it is a behavior. Some people are addicted to sex. Some people are addicted to drugs. Some people are addicted to gambling. Some people are addicted to other things. It's just an addiction mentality.
Yeah.
And before I even seen the addiction in my family, I could tell that there was something about me that made me feel like I could be susceptible to addiction before I even knew what addiction was. It was just like my thing was girls from pre-K or daycare until infinity. I was just like, they're beautiful. I want to be with them. I want them to be with me. And I had to learn how to operate within that addiction because I don't believe that, just like you said, JC, I don't believe that you can ever get rid of that indentation in your brain. The path is what the path is. However, I do believe that you can create new paths, ways that go around that indentation so that it's not always hitting the same bump in the road. It's just no different than like we have a back road to our house and there's some potholes on the back road. I can take one freeway exit up and not go the back road to my house. The only time I take the back road is really if there's rush hour traffic. Then I'm aware, hey, there's this pothole, you got to watch out for it. You got to kind of like curve around it. But from the perspective of those traditions or that genetic information that's handed down to us, I do believe that there are just some things, some people call them generational curses. Some people call them genetics. Some people call them hereditary. Like whatever it is, I believe that there is information stored in our cells that if we're getting information from our parents, it's impossible not to get some of their attributes because that information is there. Now, the caveat is what do we do with that information? No different than being a father and having to say, okay, I'm not going to have my kids go outside and get a switch like I used to have to get a switch. But if you do something that's severe enough, you will still get your butt whooped. Like there's a balance for me in that because I do know that the world and life in general will beat you up. Like you said with your sister, JC, you at some point, you got to realize that running this might lead to this. Like at some point, you have to realize that. And if I'm always shielding you from that, then you're not going to realize it until you're in the hands of somebody who doesn't care about you. And so from that perspective of genetic information and things that are passed down, things that we haven't even witnessed. I've seen that in my family, and I've been very aware of, like, even with gambling. I like to gamble. I think it's fun to do. But the moment I start running scenarios in my head and seeing, okay, if I do this card, then that card, and all these different things, once it becomes that, I'll stop gambling. Nope, I'm done. And I mean, I'll stop gambling for years because I just don't want to find myself ingrained or entrenched in that particular addiction behavior. Even again, going back to young women, when I was older and dating and on my own and able to like do whatever I wanted to do, I found myself like, oh, okay, I want this girl, this girl, this girl, this girl, because it was just like, there's so many girls. I mean, what are you supposed to do with so many options? But as I've learned that, I know that that's a part of me, but I've also learned how to say, well, yeah, it's okay to want to have a woman around you, but why do you want that woman around you? Very much to my relationship with the both of you. It's not, oh, I want them around me so I have all these female options to go to. It's, well, they're good company and we have really good conversations. Some of the deep work that I've done in my life have come from conversations that we've had, both of us, or that I've had with the both of you. And so it's understanding what that genetic information looks like. And it's really difficult when you don't know who your father is or you don't know who your mother is and you can't trace back that lineage. But be sensitive to what's going on in the main capsule and be able to say, hey, there's something here, and be unafraid to explore that. Not explore it in the sense of recklessly explore it, but be unafraid to explore what that means. And that's what's kept me out of and moved me away from being so fearful about having addiction. I know that it's there. I know that the opportunity is there, but there's certain things, like that's why I don't try recreational drugs, because I'm like, I don't know if I use a recreational drug, if that's going to lead me down that path of addiction, because I've had people overdose on drugs in my family. Oh, it felt so good that I just couldn't stop. Yeah, no, I'm not willing to take that risk. I'm going to just go ahead and pass on the recreational drug kick, save myself that money. So that's where I'm at. Sorry, that was a little lengthy, but I felt that one.
Definitely. I like how you talked about, basically you described having a curiosity about those things and not running from them. I think that one of the biggest mistakes that we can make for ourselves when we look at just our family, the different things that we've seen over generations, is to be dismissive of it. Oh, well, that has nothing to do with me, because people really don't understand the power of genetics and biology. Predispositions are real. That doesn't mean that something is going to be, but you are predisposed to be interconnected to something, especially if there's a biological connection. You are predisposed to be connected to that over someone who doesn't have that as a predisposition in their family. So I think that just being aware and being open and not being dismissive about the history of what is in your lineage, what's in your family. I mean, just think about it. History is so important just in the everyday aspect of our lives. When you think about just the history of this country, if you want to understand what's going on, you got to know what happened before then. Those things are relevant, even if that doesn't mean that a lot of the things from the past are going to still be a part of the present. It still explains a lot about what's going on now. If we think about our family and biology in the same way, everything is an inkling or an explanation, maybe even a solution for if something were to come up later. So just being cognizant, never being dismissive, as you said, being curious, and also too knowing that at the end of the day, irregardless to a predisposition, we all do have our choices, setting our boundaries and understanding what works for us. Because I know a lot of times some families do not like for you to deviate from what they're used to seeing and used to doing. It's like some crazy trippy club, especially when it's the dysfunctional stuff. You got to be in our club. No, I don't. I don't want to sit out on my porch to do that. That ain't how I roll. That's not what I want to do. So they judging you. You going in the house? Why are you going in the backyard? Because that's what they're for.
Right.
Saying, but yeah, just those little things. That was only my thought on that. But good, you had some good points, Billy.
What about you, Jesse? What you got?
You both had amazing points. And Taralyn, I'm with you. I don't want to be in the club no more. 1, 2, 3, not me. I can opt out at any time. But Man, you made some really good points. I just want to add one thing to it, and that was overcorrecting. And sometimes when you don't, what I see with like the generation now, where these kids are like, I mean, they're going around and shooting little babies. I mean, it's getting a little crazy out there. But I think some of the parents may have been guilty of either leaning into some of those traditions that were dysfunctional, or overcorrecting by just hands-off approach, not doing anything at all because they were so traumatized as children. And I think both are very dangerous.
Yeah.
Both are very dangerous. So for you to have the hands-off approach is just as bad as you engaging in the dysfunction as well, because it's like kids need correction and you shouldn't be so fearful to correct them because of what you've experienced. And that's why it's important for all adults to really reach back into their history and figure out what, when, why, how, who, and how could we have gotten from point A to point B without all the foolishness. And then let's see if we can do it that way. But yeah, you both made some super great points. And I always had told myself when I was growing up, I hated the way my mother dealt with things. And I was like, I'll never be her. I will never be her. And then I turned 18. And from 18 to 22, I was her. Literally 18 to 22, I had to one day look at myself in the mirror and I was like, oh, wow. So this is the thing, this happens. And I had to really take some time to be with myself, to be with my thoughts uncomfortably for quite some time before I got to a place where I didn't have to choose that response or reaction. And it was very hard. It was very, but it made for so much growth, and it forced me to have to use words more so than I would, which, her response was just hands. Don't get me wrong, while that felt good at the moment,
Yes.
Afterwards, it did not feel good at all. And the damage that you leave on other people, it did not feel good at all. And I was like, I don't want to be responsible for doing to someone what was done to me. And so I got to fix this. And once I fixed it, it's like I still will correct, my nieces, my nephews, and, hey, we don't do that. And I tell them why. I don't feel like you have to do it with hands per se. But it's like, I'm not going to be afraid to correct you, but I'm not going to overcorrect and just be like, well, just let them say what they want. And if that's how they feel, just no, ma'am. Ma'am.
That's how they feel. They can feel that way when they have their own house.
There you go.
Yeah, you both made really good points.
I hear you saying, which I think that talking about traumatic suppression is so important. I hear what you describing is a journey to identify and sit in what your own identity is. It is so hard sometimes to carve out your own identity in the midst of holding on to a bunch of dysfunction that in a lot of ways is biological, it's chemical. Some of it is societal. Some of it is just within the normal way in which you communicate within your family. Mm-hmm. It's so hard to carve out what my identity is in this. Some of it, some of the dysfunction feels so normal and natural. Like when you describe you with hands, girl, let me tell you something. Hands, teeth, objects, criminal damage to property. Listen. Okay. Time does us good, but when I hear you talking about that, it's some of the things that not only hurt others the most, but for every person you've hurt, you hurt yourself even more, because you're not only healing from what you did to the person, but I kind of feel like for me, it was like stripes on my soul, like burns that had to heal over. What it's like for that scab to come on, and then you got to go through the healing process. And sometimes you tear the scab off a little bit. And now it takes even longer to heal, and just that whole thing. And so carving out your own identity and finding out what specifically belongs to Taralyn. There are all of these things that feel right and that have been normalized around me. I see all the time. And even though there's a oneness with some of them because I'm used to seeing it, and some of it is a part of habit and biology, how does one, and I guess this would be a question for both of you, what would your opinion be on how would someone begin to carve out what their personal identity is and be okay with that being separate from everything that they see around them, and even some things that feel normal, even though they hurt in the end?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that question, but because my answer has to do with Soto's response, I'm going to say Soto's comment first, and then I'm going to answer that question. Soto said, I got trauma from childhood that I still react to as an adult, really deeply angry. And then when it's over, I realize it was too much. I have had a hard time controlling like at that moment.
Mm.
And then he also says, then I realize after it's all over, and I go and apologize. Oh, the art of the apology.
Do the I'm sorry tour.
Right. The art of the apology.
6 weeks.
Hey, Rashida. For me, I realize that there are things that are a part of my identity. My temper is a part of my identity, and it's very natural. However, it is not who I desire to be. I desire to be a person who is compassionate, who's stern, who can speak their mind, but not overly engaging with my temper. And especially in the era in which I was raised, that was what was acceptable. That was what was encouraged is the word I want to use. That was encouraged to be angry and tempery and feisty. And, to this day, I still remember, and in many ways, I've taught my own children, hey, look, I'm not sending punching bags to school. So if somebody's messing with you, you give them a reason not to mess with you. And for myself, it was like, I got in all kinds of trouble when I was a kid. But if I got into a fight that was justified, like you said, that right fighter, if I was in the right why I was fighting, well, they said something about you, Mom. My mom might be like, hey, you need to let that stuff go. But if I say they swung at me and they missed and I beat them up, I remember getting in a fight on a school bus where a kid sucker punched me. And I touched that kid to as many seats and as many other kids as I possibly could before they finally pulled me off of them.
I know that's right.
I didn't get in trouble for that. And in fact, my mother went to the school because they wanted to not expel me, but to kick me off the bus for the rest of the school year. My mom was like, no, my son was defending himself. He got punched in the face. What is he supposed to do? Sit there and be like, hey, please don't hit me? He's already been assaulted. And so for me, when it comes to that level of anger and knowing how angry I can get, which is so interesting, people don't think that I have this side of me. But when I decide I want to get angry, or if I decide I'm going to fight, there's no coming back from that. And that's why I fight so hard within myself to create the identity that you don't want to be 40 years old, 45 years old, 50 years old, still swinging on people.
Right.
Like, I don't want to be 50 years old, still chasing people in my car because they cut me off. I don't want to be that person. So it takes intentional steps to say, hey, look, there's what I am and there's what I want to be. At all times, I should be striving for who I want to be, regardless of what I am. That's how I get into the space of really embracing that natural versus the unnatural. Sometimes unnatural is okay if that's what we want to strive for. I'm not out here trying to be a thug. I'm pretty well spoken, so I'm not starting fights, but I realize I can be very confrontational. And so certain things where a person is not looking to start a fight, I can escalate into a situation where it's like, well, you don't have to put hands on me to prove to me that you can beat me up or that you can tell me to shut up. So let's go. And a lot of people were like, I wasn't really committed to going that far, but I know my temper will be like, no, go ahead and push them over to the edge. So now they have no choice but to really back up what they said they gonna do to you. So that's where I'm at with that particular question on how you get to this space where you have a natural identity, but there's so much more to us than what we naturally are. That natural is really the path of least resistance. And sometimes we have to go that salmon route and go back up the stream.
Yeah. Hey, Phelan, how you doing? Thanks for joining us. JC?
It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I think that while you're in the beginning stages of really trying to figure out what your triggers are and what your traumas are, it's important to be very mindful of the entertainment that you put in front of yourself. For example, I know a lot of young people that are traumatized that love watching like Love and Hip Hop because all that's doing is rewarding them for bad behavior. And they're like, yeah, I would do that too. And that's why I laid this. And so what? You're not in a place of maturity yet where you can look at something and say, hey, this is for entertainment value only. Also not behind the scenes where you can see that person who's getting charges brought against them in the court of law for putting paws on somebody. But unfortunately, entertainment edits out a lot of things and make us feel like, well, see, I would do that too. And that's someone say something like that to me and I'm gonna act like that. And it's like, but is that really, like Billy said, is that really who you want to be? Right? Do you want to be the person who can walk away from it and let someone else just be wrong? Because a lot of times I think we're so uncomfortable with allowing for other people to just be wrong. Hey, they were wrong. They shouldn't have cut you off. But that don't mean you can run them off the road and kill them vehicular manslaughter. Right. Sometimes you let people just be wrong, be the jerk, be inappropriate. But you have to bite your tongue and process and reflect. And a lot of times people will come back and say, hey, I overreacted. And you're like, well, I'm glad you came back and said something because I thought we were going to have a problem. But it's like, no, people are dealing with a lot and not processing, and they allow for you to act out of character because you're triggered. And again, a lot of times it has nothing to do with you. So spending time with yourself and paying attention to the physical changes in your body, because you will always know there's a chemical change that happens in your body when you go from calm to
the streets.
Right.
You're not saying anything, but your body is starting to warm up. The blood is rushing to certain places. Your temperatures. So when it's like, I'm not going to say too much more. That's it. Give me time. Allow me to process it. Let me get back to you. But we think that when we do that, we're weak or we lost. You didn't lose. You won. You won because you get to keep your job. You get to keep your reputation. You get to be the adult in the situation. You get to walk away. Freedom. Exactly. You get your freedom and you're not locked up. But if we respond to everyone, we give them the power and we give them the right to be like, because how many times have you watched a video and you're like, oh man, that Karen was wrong. But then you see the person turn around and do something. You was like, oh, you was good until that part. Right?
And up until there.
Now you're in handcuffs and you're going to jail when she's the one who was wrong. You know what I mean? And so it's like we transfer that power too quickly because of trauma. So you don't allow for someone to take your power and allow for you to go back to these triggering places. And you do that by replaying past situations, what was said, how you felt about it. Why do you feel that way? Why is it so important to you? Why do you have such a large reaction or response to what's being said? And then once you start processing that and you know that that's going to be a trigger point, you can just excuse yourself, ask for a moment, ask for a break, ask for some water, but not everything deserves an immediate response. And I think that's how we save ourselves, is by allowing for that moment of pause, where you pause for a moment and you say, I got two choices. A is I lose everything today. And B is I walk away, take a moment, and then revisit this when I'm able to articulate how I feel with my words and not my fist.
Right.
And when your first response is like, because I have a filthy mouth. My first response is like, I'm like, oh, I got nothing to say. They'll say Jennifer, and I'm like, oh, I'm just waiting. Just give me a moment.
Exactly. Process time. I hear you describing folks taking the time to identify what is a win for them. So we don't think about these things, right? We're talking about, okay, our identity within the scope of outside of biology, the things that you've seen in the past, within your family, generational. But what you said, Jennifer, is so important about really taking the time to decide what is a win based on you and what your goals are in your life and who you want to be, how you want to show up in this world. Because a lot of the times we don't think about that. We're just so busy being reactive. We're just so busy dealing with the triggers, dealing with those buttons that we don't know that are there, we haven't identified yet. And then in a moment of being reactive, It's not until after the fact that once you take the time to sit at it and quantify, boy, you done stacked up some losses. But what if we took the time to really sit back and evaluate, how do I define a win for Taralyn based on what I'm trying to accomplish, based on when somebody says my name, people who are associated with me, what's going to come with that?
Right.
Is what's going to come with that now in alignment with who I'm trying to be? And so when we establish what our wins are, that helps for us to hone in on our identity, who we want to be overall in every situation. Then that helps us to start to formulate, because I'm a very visual person, that helps us to start to lay out how we're going to plan to deal with triggers. How do my triggers fit into this? How do my responses fit into this? To your point, what you watch, what you listen to, if you are someone who has a violent streak, well, thank God that's so in the past for me. But when I think about the things that I watched, the people that I entertained, the places that I went, it was like pouring gasoline on a fire. I was turned all the time. I was
all the way up.
Listen, blow the roof off that. Bleed, that was me. Oh, burn the village down. Forget Red Cross. Y'all can't come up in here. Okay, because it was like lava. This to burn up the streets. You can't come in here. That's how it was, But taking the time to really think about, we think about the big picture of goals, but I don't think a lot of us spend a lot of time thinking about the person going through the different stages of making it to those goals. There's like a person who's in charge of reaching these spaces that you want to be. And if you make it there, but you're a violent a-hole who's doing a bunch of this and that, then how well is that going to do for progressing anything that you want to do? Because let's just face it, networks, you have to have people that you're interconnected with to be a success in anything. That's just life. That's just right. How things are set up, even from a spiritual standpoint, So these things are so important to identify. What's a win for you? How do you want to show up? Who do you want to be known as? When people say your name, what does that mean? What is that going to look like? And if you're thinking about that and like, oh God, well, that's okay. You just got some work to do. It's all right. But great point, Jen.
Yeah, I'm going to catch up the chat really quick. Key says, right, it's the things that you find normal. I have to reflect and take a look at the things I find normal that are actually results of suppressed traumas. Y'all good. He said, y'all good. Y'all good. How do you say this person's name?
Phelan.
Okay. Phelan says, and that's a lot of Black folks' families' problems. We don't deal with our childhood traumas. Absolutely. You know what? And I used to say that it was only Black families. That's a lot of families.
That's families.
Traumas.
Yeah.
I thought it was only Black families because of my experiences. But as I have a very diverse group of friends that I consider family, I'm finding that this is just the human experience.
Yeah.
Within the realm of families. There's healthy families, but even healthy families have traumas that they wash over and ignore and act like didn't take place. Key Bryant says y'all might have to put your therapist hat on next week and make this a therapy session. I am not certified in therapy. Let me be on the record. I have no certifications.
No, not me neither.
Soto says, yes, that's just like me. I go from zero to death road.
Okay, forget Electric Avenue, Death Road. That's it. I'm hoping.
B. Gates says, man, this is so deep. The inner struggles with self, every day working towards being the Bruce I see in my dreams. Y'all speak into my soul. Soto says, I try to walk away to reset. That's a challenge, though, sometimes, because people like to follow you. As you're trying to escape, sometimes you don't have that space to escape. And I was thinking about this during the conversation about how before I leave the house, I check to see if I have my wallet, if I have my keys, and if I have my cell phone. Those are three things that I check to make sure that I have when I leave the house. But we should also be checking some of the other things that we might be carrying, i.e. these buttons. We should be checking if we have those things. And then not only if we're leaving the house, when we're returning to our house, because a lot of the challenges that my wife and I have communication-wise when we're arguing or we're not seeing eye to eye come because I've come back into the house, that I picked up something on the way out coming back into the house, whether it's a day at work or somebody cut me off or a long line of frustration in the grocery store. You bring that back into your house, and then that experience unfolds in the relationship that had nothing to do with it. So good. I'm sorry that was a little sidebar there, but I'm keep catching up the comments.
Thank you so much for joining us.
B Gates says, put your hat on too, Key. Put your therapist hat on too, Key. So you can be a part of that conversation too. Is it Fallon?
Phelan.
I want to say Fallon so bad. Phelan says, I always try to stay away from individuals trying to pass on all they negative energy, because energy is never destroyed or lost. It's simply transferred. Absolutely.
Come on through. Yep.
People will get mad at you when you don't want to pick up that energy.
Yep.
Soto says, yes. Tammy, welcome. It says, it's family in general. Yes, it is family in general. Keisha says, I have to catch the replay. Sounds like my convo earlier today. Love it. I love when things are in sync. Good timing. And it shows in every area of your life. And hey there, Keish, we see you.
All right. Everything. Definitely. Man, good one. You know what, Billy? I was telling Billy, I said, is JC trying to be bougie? Because he gonna tell me, well, she said 10 or 15 minutes. I said, oh no, she can't come for 10 or 15 minutes and leave. What is she doing?
It wasn't, I wasn't supposed to be on that long. I really wasn't. But the conversation was so good. And I should have known better. I should have known that I was going to be on for a minute. I do want to lastly just add one more little gem to everyone. If you don't have the tools and you know that you have triggers and you are still in the process of dealing with them, pick up the phone and call a really good friend of yours who can talk you off the cliff. You all have that one person, that one mother or figure or mentor who can really make you pause and think. And if you need to phone a friend, don't be afraid to pick up a phone and phone a friend and allow them to kind of speak into you and help you to calm yourself down. Because I'd rather you do that than to have that one call from your jail cell and, you know, trying to reach out to somebody to get some bail bond money. It ain't worth it.
I keep my own bail money account. I do not fund anybody else's bail money account.
I keep Billy Wroe on speed dial.
There we go.
Bro, it's about to go down.
Right, can you look at that account for me? Oh, man.
Thank y'all for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. And congratulations, sister graduate. I'm so very proud of you. And I look forward to the great things that I know you're going to do.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us today, JC. We'll catch you another time.
Yes, sir. Bye.
Bye. Final thoughts, my friend?
Yeah, this is going to need a part 2. I don't know. Soto, we ain't even wrapped yet, Soto. No.
It's like every week we can't leave. See, I told you, Soto, I will say this because Billy and I were talking behind the scenes. I don't remember what episode it was. And we were saying that if we did something where it was like a panel and we were over a couple hours, and because it up to 2 hours, Soto, I'm just letting you know, not over that, but it would be because there was a few of us and the Q&A involved. So maybe we'll have some specials where we do some things like that and spend a little bit more time and have a few more people up here with us. I think that could be fun.
Yeah, we'll have to, you know what we can do? We can plan for that when we come back. Season 1, we'll do a 2-hour special.
Season 2.
Or season 2. Not
you
season 1.
Season 1. Don't try to keep us on season 1. We growing.
My bad. Season 2, not season 1. we could maybe come back with a special and a panel on that, because I think there's so much to unpack, especially in a topic like this. There's so much to unpack. But if I was to give a final thought when it comes to traumatic suppression, is we have to figure out a way to decompress, because when we're walking around with this traumatic suppression, we are walking around in a constant state of fight or flight. And that state is stress. And one of the things that I even heard this week was our body can't differentiate whether a bear is chasing us or a bill is overdue. Like it's just stress. And as we allow this stress into our lives, like even coming back and recovering from COVID, that was one of the things that I committed to myself. I am not going to stress about having COVID. I have it. Fortunately, I have an immune system. Hopefully my immune system does what it's supposed to do. And if it doesn't, then hopefully there's some help to get me where I need to get so that I can get over COVID. That stress that we carry with us, that hormone, it lowers our effectiveness in this life. And I love, Taralyn, when you say, how do we want to show up in our lives? We don't want to show up as ineffective. And so why would we do things that would lower our effectiveness or our potency in our lives, carrying that stress and carrying that trauma and trying to suppress it? Because the act of suppressing trauma requires effort and it requires energy. Even to ignore it, I'm gonna just let that go. I'm not gonna deal with that right now. All that requires energy and effort, and that is energy and effort that we are taking out of the life experience that we are gifted to show up in every single day. So that will be my final thought for part 1 on trauma suppression. What about you?
I have to say thank you, Tiarcha, for showing up. Thank you so much. I would have to say the most important thing that I can think of when it comes to this is be okay with being present in whatever your truth is. I think we do ourselves a huge disservice when we deny whatever our truth is. And I think a lot of it is because around us, a lot of how we should feel or we think we should feel is impacted by how we're received and what we see other people doing and how they handle their thing. And I think that's the biggest mistake that we can make. A lot of it is learned behavior from our families and different things like that. We see how they handle things. And because we're part of that environment, even though some things don't feel good, it's what we're used to seeing. It's what we're used to doing. That way of being has been normalized, And so just being present, establishing what your own identity and truth is and walking through that on your own terms, and actually understanding that because we're individuals, sometimes the healthiest thing that you can do is be doing something completely and totally different than what you've seen because it works for you. So that is it for this week. But you know what? We do this every Tuesday. If you're new here tonight, thank you so much for joining us. If you like what you heard, then come back and see us next week. Like I said, there's always every Tuesday we're doing this. There's always some different conversations that we're having. Also, feel free to let us know something that you'd like for us to tackle, because by all means, we're down with taking on some different topics that you guys might like. So every Tuesday, it is 4 Pacific Standard Time, 7 Eastern Standard Time. Tomorrow, the Wednesday Word, you guys always get Billy the very next day. Check him out on YouTube, First Row. He's going to be talking about the mirror on the Wednesday Word. That is going to be at 6:30 Pacific Standard Time. Also, you got to check out Billy on firstrow.com. Look, brain just about to be out of there.
God, I'm following you wherever you go.
You have to. Right. You got to check out the national best-selling Fire Your Job, Hire Your Passion. I'm gonna get there. You got to check out this book. I'm so proud. Billy, first-time author, national bestseller out the gate. You can even get the first chapter of the book complimentary. Once you get it, you're going to want your copy. You're going to want the journal. You're going to want to be a part of those discussions with Billy and I about this very impactful project. So check them out at firstrow.com. Also, The Grind Defined, my podcast, it's lit. Every Friday, fresh episodes. Check me out on The Grind Defined. You can go to thegrinddefined.com. And from thegrinddefined.com, you can check out TaraLynMichelle.com. Everything that's going on with me. Get connected with my book, The Ultimate Release. We got so much going on, y'all. But in the meantime and between time, go about the rest of your week owning it. Why? Because that's what you were created to do. Until next time, this is Taralyn Michelle.
Billy Wroe. One love. Peace. Thanks for sitting on the first row and The Grind Defined. Have a good evening, everyone.